Hey, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in today on this little mini episode. I get to talk about one of my favorite things, which is animals. If you follow my Instagram, you see regular appearances of my dogs, Mika, the German Shepherd, and Winnie, the mini Australian Shepherd puppy, who has recently joined our household. And I love knowing that I can give our dogs the same type of nutrition that we're getting, or at least place enough emphasis on their nutrition in the same way that we do for ours, because our pets are like our kids. For so many of us, they're just an extension. They're just a four-legged child instead of a two-legged child. So today we're going to talk specifically about food for dogs, because I don't know if you've noticed, but when you go to like a boutique dog store, the amount of food and dog treats and bones and supplements, it's like going to a natural health grocer for humans. I mean, there's so many options and a lot of it's pretty pricey. So it's kind of hard to invest in things if you don't really know what your dog needs. So we're going to talk about a little bit more of like the mainstream dog food market. So you know kind of the history behind that and really what's available to dogs. Because to be honest, like statistics show that people spend about $30 a month on dog food, which I wish that it was that inexpensive, but for the most part, I mean, many of us are spending probably a lot of money and resources buying different things, but we don't really know if it's helping our dogs. And in fact, we see obesity in dogs has gone up like 150% over the last decade. So dogs are obviously suffering metabolically, but we're also seeing shortened lifespans. I don't ever remember when I was a kid growing up with dogs, like having a 3-year-old dog with cancer or lymphoma. And now we see it quite regularly. Even dogs that are being genetically tested, where the breeders are like really, stringent on like what type of dogs are, being bred and things like that. We're still seeing disease. So even trying to control the genetic factors, there's obviously something else going on that's contributing to the accelerated rate of disease. So we're going to talk about nutrition because just like in humans, nutrition is the biggest piece of the puzzle when it comes to our health. It's the one thing that we are actively choosing every single day. And it influences the way that our bodies operate, because food is nourishment and it's information to all of the different organ systems of our bodies. So let's deep dive a little bit into dog food. So first of all, I know that just like in people, we saw this huge movement, 20 years ago or so, like the early 2000s, where it was like this huge primal movement of ancestral living. Same thing kind of happened in the dog industry. We see all of these like primal raw food diets where it's all protein. And so we made this switch from just plain old kibble and bits to this really heavy primal all protein diet, thinking that the household golden retriever is the same as the wolf in the mountains that's just eating like carcasses of its killed, prey. But these are our domesticated dogs, right? And so going from something that is highly refined and processed, like Royal Canin or Pedigree or whatever the dog food, generic dog food is, to something like a completely raw diet really is like a dramatic change, especially when dogs for, decades have been getting a highly processed diet. They haven't been getting a raw food diet, but we're seeing this trend a lot more now. So one thing I want to debunk is that dogs really do not have a carb requirement. Okay, so the average dog food has about 50% or more from carb sources, mostly potatoes and corn. And that's because they're cheap. I mean, corn is like one of the number one produced produce items like in the country, but really around the world. I mean, corn is really easy to grow and you can do a lot with corn, right? So we can make all kinds of foods, and we can refine corn seeds to be corn oil, and which we've used in the industrial seed area. So you can see a large application. So it's very inexpensive to use as filler for food. But the actual nutritional requirement for dogs is that they don't really need carbs. They do a similar process that we do called gluconeogenesis, where it can actually break down amino acids and create fuel sources from them. So similar like a carbohydrate would, without them having to process carbohydrates, because dogs are pretty insulin resistant. They have a pancreas just like we do, but their spikes in insulin last much longer. So where we have like a postprandial response to insulin, maybe for 30, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, depending on how insulin sensitive you are, dogs can have a spike in blood glucose that lasts like 6 to 8 hours. So that's quite different. And if you think about what happens when you've got lingering insulin, you've got all this extra sugar in the bloodstream, it's very inflammatory. So it does the same things metabolically in a dog that it does in humans. This is why we see so much obesity in dogs. I mean, think about it. Many of us are giving our dogs table scraps and we don't really think anything of it. But if you're feeding your dog bread or you're feeding them leftovers from your meal, they may have hours of lingering effects from that. So I'm not saying don't ever feed your dog human food. Just realize that they are made up of a lot of the same parts as we are, but their bodies are more sensitive in different ways, especially the metabolic processes. So dogs do not need, I mean, some people will say, well, we got to get the carbohydrates in. Don't think about your dog's plate the same way as your plate or the same way you view your nutrition. They have a different set of requirements. Granted, we are still working with the same macros of protein, carbohydrates, and fats, but they need different ratios. And dogs do not require a carbohydrate component to their diet. In fact, they do better when it's a higher protein and higher fat, like a 50-50 split. Now, something I want to talk about that I feel like is a big contributor to disease in dogs is what's called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs for short. So dogs consume about 122 times more of these advanced glycation end products compared to humans. That's because the things that they're getting in their diet, if you think about dog food, like just think about the way it looks, like these little brown nuggets. In order for dog food to exist, you have to take a protein source and you have to take fats, and maybe there's some other fillers and there's some other carbohydrates, but they're breaking them down, heating them at really high temperatures, and then they're infusing them together with different types of fillers and binders to form these little kibbles. Well, in that process, when you heat amino acids and proteins and fats at a high temperature together, it denatures them in a chemical reaction to where they start creating these AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. It's basically carcinogenic. Like, these are very bad. They are very toxic to the body. They're like free radicals, right? They create damage everywhere they go. They damage healthy cells. So dogs are getting 122 times more AGEs in their diets compared to humans because the food that they're getting is like ultra refined. So if you think about it in comparison to a human diet, right? We have like natural raw foods, and then we have kind of like hybridized processed foods. To me, these are kind of like the paleo puffs. They're made with whole food ingredients, limited ingredients, but they're still processed. And then you have the processed foods and then ultra processed foods. Like, ultra processed foods are like basically chemical additives all slapped together. I mean, it's like the Gushers. Like, what were Gushers? To this day, I have no idea. I don't even know if Gushers are still around, but I remember that being like such a thing. And I always felt like, I mean, I loved them, I gotta be honest, but what was like the chewy stuff with like the goo on the inside? That is for sure ultra processed. There's nothing in that is like, maybe at some point there was a real ingredient in there, but there was like 25 sets of processes that happened to take it from that piece of real food to what a Gusher actually is. So the thing to realize in this is that dogs, just by getting something that's like a kibble form, it's very, very processed. And because of that ultra processing, they are getting these carcinogenic end products that are creating free radical damage in their bodies. It's creating a cascade of inflammatory responses every time they're eating. Okay. Now, I know that I'm really like harping on dog food. And so if you think like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to be boiling chicken and making my own dog food, I do not do that. I don't have time to do that. I wish I did, but 3 kids, 2 dogs, a household, a job. There's no time for me to home make my dog food. So I do use a dog food, but I'm going to talk about some other things that we can bring in later. What I'm trying to help you understand is that a lot of dog canine related diseases are a result of their diet. And so we have to be as intentional about looking at labels on dog food so that we understand what our dogs are getting, because they're getting the same meal every single day. And if it is inflammatory and it has ingredients that are creating inflammatory processes, then we need to be able to evaluate that. Otherwise, we're setting our sweet little furry friends up for disease. And we don't want to do that. So most of the dog food brands, like the top 5 dog food brands, first of all, it's an $80 billion industry, the dog food industry. It's big. The top 5 players, none of them have a raw food product yet. Okay, so that's concerning in and of itself because a raw food diet is really the best diet. It is mostly protein. It is limited ingredient. That's the same standards for people. When you can just have real food in its raw form, it's always going to be better. So for dogs, especially, having a raw food diet to me is step 1. Now, it may be that it's frozen. There may be some preparation involved in utilizing it, but I think that that's the best diet for most dogs. And the top 5 brands, like I said, none of them have that, which means that the majority of people buying dog food are buying their dog's crap, which is why we're having this conversation, because hopefully we can start to understand maybe that our dogs need a little bit better. Like we need to set the bar a little bit higher. And it may mean that, you've got to swap some things out, rebudget some things. I know I've had to do that several times and I'm still learning. I actually want to bring up a book here because I'm just now thinking of it. It's called Forever Dog. And it is hands down one of the best reads. If you are really into learning more about nutrition for your dog, this would be the book I would get. You can get it on Amazon. I got it. It's by Dr. Becker. It's called The Forever Dog. We'll put it in the show notes. But it's everything you could want to know about the history of dog food, what your dog's nutritional requirements are, and how you can even formulate and create a diet for your dog's specific conditions. So check that out because it'll be super helpful. Some of the things I'm going over today are things that I've read through that book. So you'll see maybe some overlap there. But by and large, if you are going to a Petco or a PetSmart and most of the dog food on the shelves is going to be ultra processed, it's going to have a high level of these AGEs. And on top of that, there is no censoring for dog food companies. There is no requirement for them to list chemical additives. So if they are buying products, they are buying ingredients from a third-party source to manufacture their dog food, they can buy that. And if there was any processing involved in that, they don't have to disclose it. The FDA has much stricter, and I mean, that's saying a lot too, right? Because I've done several episodes on how the FDA doesn't really set the bar that high, but the FDA does a much better job with human food, but with dog food, kind of anything goes, meaning that the labels don't have to be super comprehensive. On top of that, they do not have to do third-party testing for heavy metals, chemical additives, or fillers. Now, this is, to me, really significant because you can have a whole food based diet for your dog. But if you are buying it from a company that is not vetting their sources, they could be getting high levels of herbicides, pesticides, heavy metals, things like that, because there's no requirement for there to be testing on that. So I always like to look at companies that are willing to do that because canned food, especially, I'll go ahead and say this. I know from what I've read, canned food is the biggest offender. So if you're feeding your dog canned food, they are for sure getting a higher level of exposures of heavy metals and toxins than in a raw food or in a kibble variety. So I would limit the canned food as much as possible, if not completely eliminate it. Now, I mentioned glyphosate. I mentioned herbicides and pesticides. This is something that I believe we need to address for our dogs. Glyphosate levels are 32 times higher in dogs than they are when we test them compared to humans. I believe that a lot of this is probably that our dogs are spending a large portion of their time in our yard, or when we're walking them, they're in the grass. Most of the grass, if you live in a neighborhood or even maybe at your home, you're getting your lawn sprayed with different chemicals. The number one weed killer, Roundup, contains a chemical component called glyphosate. Glyphosate, we know, is linked to cancer. It's linked to a lot of different diseases, but it is extremely toxic to the body, even in the smallest doses. In fact, I just don't even think there's any threshold for glyphosate to ever be safe for the human body or for your dog. And your dog is testing 32 times higher than a person, which means we have to do a really good job with their nutrition, making sure that they're getting enough antioxidants and trying to buffer and limit the exposure. So if you have like a True Green or a lawn company, I would definitely talk to them. I'm staring out the window at my grass right now, and you can tell I do not have a lawn company because My grass is like half weeds. But I don't ever want to spray it because my dogs are outside and my kids are outside. And I do not want those chemicals coming in my house. I don't want them on the dog's feet. I don't want them getting on the kids. So there are ways around it. It may just mean that your yard doesn't look quite as nice and pristine as your neighbor's, but I'd rather live longer and have weeds than have a nice yard and everybody's sick. So just realizing that it can go a long way to really support your dog nutritionally because they are naturally going to have higher level of exposures to these chemical contaminants that we know are very destructive to their bodies. Now, let's do a quick run through of some herbs because this is really fun for me. I think that a lot of times we're afraid to give our dogs food. Like everybody's heard, don't give your dog chocolate. There's certain types of foods like grapes that contain components in them that make your dogs violently ill. From time to time, my dogs will get into something and, we've got diarrhea and vomiting and everything else. And I know the kids dropped a grape on the ground and the dog ate it. And so now we've got 3 days of stomach distress. But outside of a few things, like a few limited items, you can really give your dog a lot of the foods that you're eating, and a lot of them can help support their immune system and the detoxification processes for when they are exposed to these things. So some of the things I love to routinely give our dogs are some herbs. And there's Honest Kitchen makes an herbal digestive blend. So if you're like, oh, I'm never going to remember to buy all of these, you can either use dried herbs that you have, or you can buy herb powder mixes. Or if you're just cooking and you have fresh basil, or you've got, fresh cilantro, or, even rosemary, those are great. You can add those to your dog's food, and maybe they don't love them. So you'll kind of find the ones that they gravitate towards and ones that maybe they avoid. And so maybe you don't have to force it on your dog, but I always like sprinkling some extra stuff on their food just to see if their body's resonating with it, because dogs really have this inherent ability to know what they need. A lot of times you'll see dogs eating grass, or they avoid their food altogether when they have an upset stomach. They just know. They know what their body needs. They'll stay away from things that they feel like are a threat, unless you're one of my dogs and they're picking up grapes on the floor. Then I question a little bit of their judgment. But for the most part, dogs will gravitate and will consume the things that they feel like their body needs. So cans of sardines, great. Getting all of the omegas in their dogs. I usually, if I buy cans of sardines, I'll just throw a spoonful of my sardines on the dog's food and they eat it. They love it. Same goes for eggs. Eggs are really nutrient dense and they've got a lot of choline and vitamins. So you can throw a whole egg, you can throw the egg yolk, and it doesn't even need to be cooked. I'll throw it on raw on top of their food and they eat it right up. Again, not an everyday thing, but just diversifying their diet, giving them exposure to different nutrients. And I know if I'm eating these eggs, I'm buying the pastured ones, the organic ones, they're getting a high quality food. Organ meats are huge. You can buy this in pet food stores now. You'll see them in the frozen section. They have the dried ones. Always remember, frozen is going to be the best way. Dehydrated is good, right? But that is also a way of preserving food. So there's some processing involved in heating and drying and things like that, which does denature the nutritional profile of the meat itself. Still is very good. But if you're looking for what's the most nutrient dense form, always go frozen. I realize, I kind of do a blend because I don't think about thawing things all the time. And so sometimes frozen is great. You can find all kinds of frozen probiotic infused foods, even vegetables. They'll have some that are kind of pureed and frozen, and then they'll add some probiotics to it. Those can be really helpful. The other thing I love to give is raw milk and raw kefir or colostrum. So if you have a dog that seems to be having a lot of immune issues, or maybe they've got eye issues, they've got infections in their eye that are recurring, or they have bowel, either diarrhea, or they don't have normal bowel rhythms. Adding a little bit of colostrum can be really helpful for their gut and for their immune system. You can do raw forms. You can find goat. You can find cow. I buy from a local person here in Charleston, and I usually pick up a small little container of raw goat's colostrum, and I'll just put a little bit on. Again, I'll buy it 1 week and then, they'll come off of a week. But if I know that they're having any type of, they're fighting anything, whether it's just maybe they ate something that's upset their stomach, or maybe they've been exposed to a chemical that's having a reaction, I'll always go for something like a colostrum, something that has a lot of probiotics to nourish their gut. Now, I talked about a few herbs. Rosemary, so good for, and you're going to find a lot of like the benefits of rosemary for people or for any herb, also translates for your dogs. So it's anti-cancer. It's an antioxidant, a powerful antioxidant, and it's great for their brain. So you can even add some of your capsules if you have, any of the Supreme products or any high quality herb in capsule form. You can just break the capsule open. Now, I always start small with dogs. Like I wouldn't give them a whole capsule if they've never had any of it before, but you can add that in there. So if you're traveling or if your dog is at say they're at like a dog daycare, and so they're just around a lot of dogs, you want to support their detoxification processes, support their brain, and support antioxidants. That's a great one to have on board. Cilantro is another really good one specifically for that glyphosate. So you can add fresh cilantro. You can do dried cilantro. It's very potent. Your dog may or may not love that one, but I find that if you mix them, this is where you kind of can get creative. Same thing with your kids, right? We all use the same tactics. You just mix it with something they like. So my dogs love the goat's kefir. So I can add anything to it and they will almost always eat it. One of the other things that they actually really like that I've noticed is bee pollen. So if your dog struggles with a lot of itching and allergies, like hot spots, they're constantly chewing on their nails and their feet, add some bee pollen in, because similar in the way that it works for humans, it has a nutritional profile that helps support the immune response, a healthy immune response. So I give this to my kids. I give a little sprinkle on the dog food. I keep a little jar with a spoon. I'm a big fan of Hobby Lobby's jars. That I organize everything with all the jars with labels, but I almost always have bee pollen on hand because you can keep it in the refrigerator, add a little sprinkle when you need it. But my dogs love the taste of it. So it is kind of sweet. So, I don't blame them, but bee pollen for allergies, also great. Again, adding in some of that colostrum, mixing those together is like a perfect combo. If your dog is nauseous at all, ginger is really good. Add a little bit of sprinkle of dried ginger on their food. That can really help settle their stomach. Oregano is great as an antimicrobial, similar in use with humans. Your dog may smell like an Italian hoagie after having that for a while, but it's extremely effective. So the days that your dog is at a dog park, maybe they've been drinking out of a pond, that they've likely had some exposures to pathogens, or they just have patterns where you feel like, what, they're dragging their butt on the ground. Like they got some pinworms. They got some kind of stuff going on. Oregano is really good and wormwood is really good. And there's a company called Zuma that makes a liquid dewormer with wormwood. It's a tincture. You can add it to their water. I use this for my own dogs as kind of a natural dewormer, and I just do it rotationally. So I'll do it maybe 1 month and then I'll skip a month. I'll do it the next month, kind of go a lot based on what I see with them. But I always am adding in some antimicrobials. Olive leaf is another really gentle one. Great for the immune system, great for addressing pathogens. So you can sprinkle some olive leaf. I really think there are so many different ways you can support your animal. And most of us, like if you're listening to this, you probably have a lot of these on hand. Just realizing you can use them for your pet too is, to me, great, because now I don't have to go spend like an arm and a leg at the boutique store buying, $100 CBD. CBD is great for dogs, but you may have some CBD at your house. You've got some of these herbs in your house. Try some of that out, because to me, it's very cost effective, but it's also effective in supporting their bodies. The one other one I'll mention here for herbs is milk thistle. Many of our dogs' livers are overwhelmed by the toxic burden in our home. So cleaning up your household, I won't even go, that's a whole other thing, but just knowing like anything you're cleaning your floors with, or just like fragrances, things like that, dogs are so sensitive to it. And it's really a burden on their detoxification organs. So you can even add some milk thistle. I have one from Activation Products. It's an oil. It's based in an oil. And I'll just drizzle a little bit of that on the dog's food, especially if I've seen people in the neighborhood coming out. Like I just saw them spraying all the weeds and like fertilizer and stuff on all the common grounds. And I take the dogs for walks all the time. And so I know that they're touching some of that stuff, even when I try to keep them off of it. So I'll bring in a lot of times milk thistle, some rosemary, and even a little bit of cilantro, right? Because of that glyphosate exposure. Now, a couple other ones that you may not realize may be helpful that support their brain, because a lot of us have dogs that have anxiety or they have separation fears. Ashwagandha and L-theanine and bacopa are all different supports that you can add for your dog for their brain. And many of us have L-theanine. Again, you could just take a capsule, break a little bit of it open. Bacopa kind of helps calm the brain, but gives them like a sharpness. So they're more aware. It's like a lot of times we just have to like sedate our dogs. It's like, give them some CBD, give them L-theanine. It just kind of like calms them down. But Bacopa is actually really healthy for their brain, as it is for humans. So those are some great tools for you as well. Now, I say all of this because hopefully to me, it was helpful to realize that some of this stuff was safe, because I am always fearful I'm going to give the dog something and it's going to poison them, or I'm going to use an essential oil in the house and they're going to like, be vomiting and be like really sick. But in large part, there's very few, and you can Google lots of lists of things that are known to be toxic to dogs. But when it comes to their food, a lot of what we're eating every day, your dog can have. So like I said, it's not about just limiting everything all the time. It's really about knowing how to help support them, because there are alternatives than going to your vet and getting antibiotics or getting steroids or getting topical creams. They all work. But again, same with our bodies. Do we really want to be adding more chemical burden to our pets? No, I don't want my dog on antibiotics. There are natural dewormers that we can use. You can use diatomaceous earth. I'll use that. You've got to be really small doses, but you can use that as well. You can also use binders. So things like Takasumi are great, or charcoal. The times that my dogs have either had exposures or I know they've eaten something and they're just like violently ill and throwing up, I'll sprinkle Takasumi on their food, and that will help bind everything up in the gut. It helps stop that diarrhea, and again, starts to pull out some of that toxicity. So think in your mind when you're looking at your dog's meals and food, when you're looking at their supplementation, think about it in the same patterns you do for yourself. We're always asking ourselves the question of, what do we feel like our body really needs right now? How can we help support the different systems that seem deficient? Where are the gaps that we can bring in some of the natural supports? And how do I do it from a lifestyle perspective of limiting exposures and supporting organ health and supporting kind of the synergy of all the different organ systems together? So I hope that this has been helpful. It was kind of fun researching a lot of this stuff, and I started playing around. If you follow me at all on social media too, I talk a lot about Body Bio products, their PC and their balance oil, and I actually started giving that to the dogs. Oh, and I didn't even talk about mushrooms. I love giving mushrooms to the dogs. So reishi and cordyceps, all of the different medicinal mushrooms can also be really immune modulatory and supportive, and really good. They're high in beta glucans, so really good for the immune system. Oh my gosh, the gut microbiome, like all mushrooms are so good. I drink mushroom tea all the time. I started breaking open the little reishi spore capsules that I also, I will break those open and put those in my coffees just to it just kind of increases the amount of spores of reishi. But I started adding that with the Body Bio products. Now, I don't know that they're, clinically indicated. So I'm just telling you what I do. And my dog's coats have been so shiny. I mean, way more than they were before. So something to think about, something that I feel like may be able to support your own dog. Because again, if you're buying it and using it, just try throwing a little bit on their food and see how they do. So guys, I know that was a quick rundown. Check the show notes. I'll link everything in there, Zuma, all the different products. Hopefully this helps you. Give your little pup a squeeze. I love all those little animals. I'm an animal girl at heart, dog girl at heart. Can you ever have too many? It's the question I want to know. All right, guys, thanks for joining me today. I will see you on the next episode.